This is Module 1C of our course HIS 218, and we have been studying terrorism. We try to understand what terrorism is. We've also attempted, to understand terrorism by looking at the various definitions of terrorism in an attempt to give us a deeper understanding of what terrorism is. And in the process, we've looked at how it relates, that is terrorism, how it relates with other forms of violence, like guerrilla warfare and so on and so forth. This helps us to be able to distinguish between what terrorism is and what terrorism is not. We've, been able to understand that terrorism, are more or less like methods of violence. There are methods in which people prosecute violence, the same way that we have guerrilla warfare as a tactic or as a strategy of warfare. But groups, use this interchangeably, and we're able to understand that it is the ideology and the desired goal of each group that determines, whether they are classified as, guerrilla armies or as terrorist groups. Most importantly, the labeling of organizations or governments, that have been placed on such groups. So, in trying to go further in an understanding of terrorism, we want to start by looking at characteristics of terrorism. What are the characteristics of terrorism? What are those recognizable features that you can, relate terrorism with and be able to be concretely, construct, what terrorism is? And one of the key, or let's say the foundational, the fundamental characteristics of terrorism is extremist ideology. We are going to subsume all the other characteristics, of terrorism under these, three or four characteristics which I have here. So number one, we have extremist ideology, which is crucial, it forms the foundation, the bedrock of terrorist groups. Then we have violent methodology, which is another key characteristic of terrorism. And then finally, we have intimidation and coercive strategy. These are the three major, classifications of the characteristics of terrorists or terrorism as a whole. So we'll start by analyzing extremist ideology. What is ideology? What is ideology on the whole? Ideology is a system of values, beliefs, and ideas common to a specific group of people. So every terrorist group has a specific system of belief. They have a belief system, they have ideas, they have, a common, collective of ideas or beliefs that they share among themselves. And it is this ideology that even, forms the bedrock, the beginning. It forms what inspires the growth, the formation, and development of that particular terrorist group. So the ideology of the group is what even creates the very incentive for recruiting people into that terrorist group. It is what they believe, what they make other people believe that, helps them recruit people into a particular terrorist. So the ideology of a terrorist group is very crucial in understanding terrorism, in trying to understand the different terrorist groups. Not just understanding terrorism as a whole, but each terrorist group has its own unique ideology. Some ideologies may be similar to other ideologies, but it is important to understand that it is the ideology, the unique ideology of that terrorist group that forms the driving force of the terrorist group. It determines how they think, it determines their actions, it determines their methodology, it determines their strategy. Their ideology is the foundation. And most importantly, it is this same ideology that determines the bedrock of counter-terrorism. So whenever governments or international organizations are attempting, to counter a particular terrorist group, they have to look at the ideology of that terrorist group. What do they believe? It is when you change their belief system, you reverse their belief system, that you can now be able to counter them, counter terrorism. As the Bible says, as a man thinketh in his mind, so is it. So it is the way they think that creates their persona. It creates who they are. So if they are terrorists, then it is the way they think. And the way they think is based on their belief system, their value system, and the common things that they share among themselves as the values that they hold among themselves. So extremist ideology is common. It's a common characteristic among terrorist groups. It is extreme in the sense that it is often taken beyond the confines of what we call normal relationship values. In other words, the manner in which they conduct their relationship with other people most of the time impedes on the freedom or liberty of other people. That's why we call it extremism, because it's not normal, it's not balanced. It's or either on the extreme right or it's on the extreme left. Now, some of the very prominent examples of extreme, ideologies, within terrorist groups is Wahhabism. Wahhabism is the brand of Islam that is practiced in Saudi Arabia, for instance. And for many, this is very, very extreme because they believe in beheading people, cutting people's arms off. Somebody steals, they cut off your arm, and their version of Sharia is very, very extreme. The manner in which they handle women and women liberty, so on and so forth. So if you study Wahhabism, you study Wahhabism to some depth, to some extent, you realize that not all Muslims all over the world, agree with that particular version of Islam, and they consider it, to be quite extreme. A second form of Islamic extreme ideology is Salafism. Now, Salafism is also considered, to be very, very dangerous, and it is, practiced by people like ISIS, by Al Qaeda, so on and so forth. And their own, belief system, as ingrained inside of Islam, normally takes certain scriptures to the belief of some clerics out of context. They take the scriptures out of context and they use them as reasons or defense for terrorist acts, killing of other people, so on and so forth. Last but not the least is right-wing extremist ideals. It's not only Islam that contains extremist ideology. We have, other groups that also, contain extremist ideologies. The right-wing extremists, like Nazi groups, and white supremacist groups. These are extreme, right-wing extreme groups that, have, ideologies that impede on the rights of other people, that are extreme in nature. And as you can see here, for instance, in Western countries, over this short period of time, you can see that jihadists who, follow extreme ideological views, were responsible for a lot of attacks, a lot of, terrorist attacks, but also at the same time, you can also see in the graph here that right-wing groups were also responsible, for very bloody terrorist attacks in Western countries. So, extreme Islamic ideologies are not, the only form of extreme ideologies that are responsible, for terrorist attacks all over the world. You have other groups too that are also, responsible for terrorist attacks. And, like I said earlier, these Wahhabists, are largely domiciled in Saudi Arabia. Then you also have, Salafis, who are mostly groups like ISIS, Al Qaeda, so on and so forth. Then we have Nazi groups and white supremacist groups that are largely right-wing groups, and they are all over the world, are conducting terrorist activities, killing people, and generally upsetting the social order. Now, this brings us to the end of this part of the module, and we'll continue in the next module.